The greatest mistake a man can make isn't losing a woman, it's losing his direction. It all begins with gestures too small to notice, a concession here, an adaptation there. He doesn't realize it, but his energy begins to bend. He stops being presence and becomes approval. He changes the tone of his voice to sound gentler, avoids disagreement to keep the peace, adjusts his plans to fit hers. And little by little, his inner center shifts. He's no longer the one deciding the path. It's her desire that dictates the compass. At first it seems beautiful. He believes he's being empathetic, caring, understanding. But the rational mind builds justifications for what the body already knows. He's drifting away from himself. This constant adaptation isn't love, it's fear. Fear of disappointing, of seeming indifferent, of being left behind. And that's where the erosion begins. Silent, but deep. There comes a moment when masculinity loses density. It's not visible, but it's perceptible. His voice loses firmness. His words become too soft, too calculated, and what once radiated direction begins to vibrate hesitation. Without realizing it, the man trades his purpose for the need to be loved. The result is always the same: an energy without axis, a movement without roots. The mistake isn't caring. The mistake is caring so much that you dissolve. The mistake isn't loving. The mistake is loving, as if asking for permission to exist. There is a kind of exile that doesn't require physical distance, only the loss of contact with one's own meaning. When purpose is traded for attention, a man enters that kind of desert. He's still there in the same place, following the same routines, but something in his eyes reveals it. He's no longer present. His life now orbits around an external axis. He has lost his inner north. This erosion is slow. First disappears the pleasure in what once moved him. Then comes apathy, not sadness, but the absence of impulse. He still works, still talks, still makes plans, but everything sounds mechanical, lifeless. And it's precisely in that emptiness that the body begins to say what the mind refuses to admit. The breath shortens, the posture closes, the gaze dims. It's the unconscious saying, "I'm empty." Masculinity loses substance when it stops generating its own movement. The man who once inspired respect begins to seem like someone who needs approval to feel alive. What he doesn't realize is that in the language of desire, dependence is the opposite of attraction. Feminine energy doesn't feed on need, it withdraws from it. Because a woman's instinct senses when masculine energy has stopped being a source and has become a demand. Few perceive it. A woman may still be physically close, but emotionally, she's already gone. The bond remains, but respect dissolves. And without respect, love cannot survive. It becomes habit, convenience, guilt. And so the man begins to wither inside his own relationship, present but absent. A woman feels it. Even when she can't rationally explain what changed, her body knows. It knows when a man's gaze stopped being a horizon and became a mirror, when touch lost direction and began seeking validation, when his presence, once magnetic, turned into waiting. It's a subtle change but visceral, and her instinct responds with distance. She doesn't do it out of malice, it's not a conscious choice. It's the reflection of an energetic law. The feminine cannot respect what bows before it, because respect is born from the perception of strength, not control but axis. When he loses that axis, she feels something essential has broken, and without knowing why, she begins to cool. It's not immediate disinterest, it's gradual detachment. And "I don't know what I feel anymore" that really means, "I don't know who you are anymore." At this point, the man tries to compensate. He sends messages, starts conversations, makes promises. But the more he tries to prove value, the more she feels his absence. Because it's not attention she wants, it's direction. It's the magnetism of someone anchored in himself. A woman may say she wants to be the priority, but what truly awakens her desire is realizing the man has something greater than her, a purpose that guides him, a fire that doesn't depend on her to stay lit. When he abandons that inner fire, the field between them shifts. What once was tension and mystery becomes predictable and emotionally flat. The relationship loses polarity, and without that energetic contrast, the feminine loses the impulse to surrender. She doesn't pull away out of cruelty, she pulls away by instinct, because something in her still seeks the sun, and the man who lost himself no longer shines. It's in that silence that the man awakens. He realizes that rejection wasn't the end, but the reflection of what he failed to sustain within. And that's where reconstruction begins, not of the relationship, but of the axis. Nothing is less interesting to a woman than a man who's lost his path. The beginning is almost imperceptible. He believes he's only adjusting to the relationship, being attentive, involved, present. But there's a thin line between presence and dependence, and he crosses it without noticing. Before, he set the rhythm of interaction. Now, he reacts to every signal, every silence, every mood. What once was direction becomes response. His energy stops leading and starts reflecting. He doesn't decide. He waits for the tone, the message, the validation. That's the point where the masculine loses its original frequency. He stops emitting and starts echoing. He becomes a reflection of what she feels, and the mirror never has power over the image it reflects. Masculinity, which once offered emotional safety, starts generating instability. Because a woman intuitively perceives when strength turns into hesitation. When "I'm here" turns into "Do you still want me here?" This inversion is treacherous because it disguises itself as affection. He believes he's being loving. But love that requires constant confirmation isn't love, it's anxiety in disguise. When a man loses his axis, the field of attraction inverts. He starts orbiting around her, and paradoxically, the more he tries to get closer, the more she feels the need to pull away. Not out of contempt, but because her instinct seeks direction, not reflection. When a man lives reacting to what she does, he disconnects from his purpose. And without purpose, there is no presence. And without presence, there is no desire. The collapse of attraction always begins this way, with a role reversal so subtle that he only notices it when the silence has already become definitive. A man confuses surrender with abdication. He confuses care with servitude. And the more he loses his sense of center, the more he believes he's loving. But there's a difference between loving someone and losing yourself in that love. When he begins to live according to her moods, he's no longer in a relationship. He's in emotional submission. The mind tries to justify it. I'm just being attentive. She's just my priority. I'm investing in the relationship. But deep down, it's a desperate attempt to be chosen. What drives him isn't affection, it's the fear of exclusion. Need creates the illusion of love, but it's an illusion that drains, because it demands constant proof. He starts seeking in her reaction the confirmation of his own existence. Each ignored message becomes a wound, each silence an abyss. The woman senses the shift. She begins to feel that he no longer loves with freedom, but with attachment. And attachment suffocates. The man who once radiated peace now radiates need. His gaze no longer welcomes, it demands. And every demand, no matter how subtle, removes pleasure from the bond. Because feminine pleasure lives in flow, and need interrupts it. She stops feeling lightness and starts feeling weight. It's the beginning of distance. Neuroscience explains it simply. The human limbic system interprets the energy of scarcity as a threat. When a man shows emotional dependence, a woman's brain perceives that energy as instability. Her instinct retreats. It's a biological response. What the man feels as rejection is, in truth, the reflection of his own insecurity amplified within the other's emotional field. Love is not control, nor constant presence. It is inner direction. And without that direction, any bond becomes symbiosis, a silent game of who gives more and who empties first. Mystery isn't absence, it's depth. It's the inner space where a man nourishes himself from his own life without depending on external approval. When he loses that space, he becomes predictable, and predictability kills desire. A woman senses when a man no longer has his own inner world, when everything in him revolves around her. He becomes a reflection of what she thinks, wants, feels, and the feminine is not interested in a mirror. The feminine desires the unknown, what challenges it to reveal itself. There's a common mistake among men. believing that being constantly available is a sign of value. In reality, it's the opposite. The man who is always available projects scarcity. He shows that his life revolves around waiting, that there are no horizons beyond her presence. And the feminine, which moves by flow and expansion, feels that lack of horizon as a void. What was once curiosity becomes boredom. What was once desire becomes indifference. Mystery is not manipulation. It's the natural consequence of a life filled with meaning. A man with purpose doesn't need to hide anything. He simply has too much happening within him. He's naturally occupied because his mind, body, and energy are directed towards something that transcends the relationship. And that's what makes him magnetic. Because feminine desire is born from the perception of value, and value is born from emotional independence. When a man disconnects from his own mystery, he becomes emotionally flat. And the feminine, which thrives on contrast and depth, no longer finds a field to expand into. Her silence is not punishment. It's the reflection of the emptiness he began to emit. Attraction collapses when a man abandons his own north. Not because she stopped loving him, but because he stopped being a reference. She may still be present, but respect, that invisible fuel of admiration, has already dissolved. And once respect is gone, there's no reconquest technique that can bring it back. Only the reunion with purpose can restore lost magnetism. A man must understand, she isn't pulling away from him. She's pulling away from what he became when he stopped being himself. And the only way to reverse it isn't by trying to bring her back. It's by returning to himself. Because when a man finds his direction again, the universe reorganizes around him, including hers. It's not her who needs to admire you. It's you who needs to become admirable again. There comes a moment when a man must stop chasing and start listening, not to her silence, but to his own. Because within that silence, the echo of truth begins to rise. He realizes it wasn't her who left, it was he who drifted. And that drift can't be corrected with words, it's corrected with presence. Absence, when conscious, becomes a tool of realignment. Silence, when intentional, marks the beginning of reconstruction. The man who tries to win her back through insistence remains trapped in the illusion that power lies outside. But masculine power has always been in the axis. When he withdraws, it's not escape, it's strategy. It's the return to his own center. And in that withdrawal, he begins to observe what he used to ignore, his patterns, his concessions, his fears. He realizes it wasn't the woman who weakened him. It was he who abandoned himself to fit into something smaller than his own greatness. True silence isn't the absence of sound, it's presence without noise. It's the mind that stops negotiating, justifying, wanting to be understood. In that state, the man starts to feel again the weight of his own body, the solidity of his own energy, and the world, once confusing, begins to reorganize. What once seemed rejection starts to look like a signal. He understands that every distance was a chance to meet himself again. Every loss was an invitation to return to his rightful space. The woman feels this new silence. It's not the silence of escape. It's the silence of awareness. She senses when he becomes presence again, not through words but through energy. The man who reconnects with his own axis emits something that doesn't need explanation. It's a calm, solid magnetism that says without words, "I'm back." When a man reconnects with his purpose, something changes in his frequency. He wakes up with direction again. His focus is no longer proving worth, but expressing it. His energy stops being reactive and becomes creative again. He returns to building, not to impress, but because creating is his nature. This movement is almost spiritual, the moment when the masculine realigns with the flow of life. Purpose is not an external goal, it's a state of internal coherence. It's when what a man thinks, feels, and does are in harmony. When he lives in that alignment, anxiety disappears, because the anxious man is the one disconnected from his own direction. He expects something external to give him back the meaning he abandoned inside. But the centered man creates his own meaning, and that changes everything. Feminine energy responds to that transformation almost immediately. A woman feels the return of stability. She senses that the man has become solid ground again, and it's on that ground that the feminine expands. What feminine desire seeks deep down is not power, it's vibrational safety. The man with purpose radiates that safety without needing to promise it. He doesn't convince, he demonstrates. His gaze regains its light, his posture regains its weight, his presence regains its authority. When a man reconnects with what moves him, desire stops being something he pursues and becomes something he awakens. Because purpose vibrates at a frequency that naturally attracts what resonates with it, and the feminine, attuned to that vibration, feels it. It's not magic. It's energetic coherence. The man who lives by purpose emanates stability, and stability is the soil where desire blooms. Respect and desire aren't reconquered, they're restored. And that restoration doesn't come from strategy, but from presence. The man who has returned to himself doesn't need to affirm anything, he's complete. He no longer seeks validation, because he's understood that value doesn't lie in being chosen, but in choosing his own path. That self-sufficiency is what makes him magnetic. A woman feels it before she even understands it. Her body recognizes the vibration of a man who owns himself. Masculine magnetism is silent, yet powerful. It doesn't beg, doesn't display, doesn't compete. It simply is. And being is the most attractive force there is. When a man returns to his axis, his gaze stops being a request and becomes an invitation. The energy shifts, the body relaxes, but the field expands. He doesn't need to chase, because his presence itself begins to draw in what's meant for him. It's the state of sovereignty, when life begins to move toward the one who stands centered. At that point, the woman feels the difference. The same man who once seemed predictable now radiates mystery again, but it's an authentic mystery, not rehearsed. She senses that there's life happening inside him, and that vitality is irresistible, because the feminine is drawn to the inner movement of the masculine. He is the fire that illuminates, and she is the dance around that light. Respect returns, desire returns, but the most important thing is that he no longer depends on either. The man has found his axis again, and that axis makes him free. Free from the need to be accepted, free from the fear of being forgotten, free from the guilt of having been lost. The man who returns to himself doesn't need to prove anything. He simply lives so aligned that the world reorganizes around him, and suddenly, everything that once seemed chaotic begins to make sense. Love isn't what holds you, it's what orbits around your fire. The sun makes no promises, it simply exists, and by existing becomes indispensable. It doesn't need to chase the planets. It is its own gravity that keeps them in orbit. When a man rediscovers his purpose, he reaches that same state. He stops chasing love and begins to radiate the kind of energy that naturally attracts it. The world starts to respond to his frequency, not his words. Because true influence doesn't come from effort. It comes from coherence. The man who becomes the sun understands that power doesn't lie in control, but in sustainment. Sustaining presence, purpose, rhythm. He's no longer driven by fear of loss, but by clarity of path. And that clarity is magnetic. It shapes respect, awakens admiration, and restores the natural attraction that always belonged to the centered masculine. He doesn't need to prove himself, because his very silence already communicates authority. To be the sun is to remain steady when everything around changes. It's to maintain direction even when the external world becomes disordered. The man who lives by purpose doesn't react. He observes, understands, adjusts. His strength is calm but constant. His mind is stable but alive. And when a woman stands before this kind of man, she feels something different. Not only desire, but reverence. Because the feminine recognizes the presence of an axis that does not bend before storms. This man doesn't shine to be seen. He shines because that's what he is. And it's precisely that naturalness that makes him impossible to ignore. The respect he evokes isn't demanded. It's spontaneous. He is the gravitational center of his own life, and everything that comes near must reorganize around that force. Women don't fall in love with what a man does for them. They fall in love with what he does for himself, because what inspires him to live is what inspires them to come closer. When a man is in motion, the feminine feels that flow and is drawn to it. Love stops being an attempt and becomes a consequence. the reflection of an energy already complete in itself. The man who lives to please loses respect. The one who lives to serve his mission awakens it. Even if she doesn't understand it rationally, a woman is drawn to a man who's building something beyond her. Because the feminine instinct doesn't seek the comfort of control. It seeks the thrill of inspiration, and nothing inspires more than a man who refuses to abandon his path. Purpose is what separates the emotionally mature man from the emotionally dependent one. The first creates, the second waits, the first inspires, the second begs. And feminine energy will always choose the creative movement, because the feminine is the answer to the masculine acting in alignment with its own center. The result of that is natural. When a man becomes purpose, love stops being a struggle and becomes expansion. He no longer needs guarantees. He simply lives so coherently that everything around him adjusts. The love he receives is the reflection of the fire he sustains, not of the need that consumes him. To be the sun is to understand that the true conquest is not the woman, it's your own integrity. And when he understands this, something changes in his vibration. He ceases to be someone who tries to keep what he has and becomes someone who creates what he desires. And the difference between the two defines the kind of love he attracts. When purpose is the center, love stops being a prison and becomes an orbit. She revolves around his light, not out of submission, but out of resonance. Because the man who belongs to himself doesn't demand, he inspires. He doesn't control, he moves. He becomes a reference, not a prisoner. The woman follows him, not because he dominates her, but because she recognizes in him the same fire that awakens her own desire to grow. The man who becomes the sun understands that real power isn't in being desired, but in being indispensable to his own existence. He doesn't need to be remembered, because he's present in everything he touches. He doesn't need to be understood, because he emits clarity. He doesn't seek love because he is love in motion. The fire that guides him is the same that illuminates those who approach. And those who can't resist his light aren't being conquered. They're being reminded of what they too can become. When a man lives by purpose, the world begins to turn with meaning again. Every action has weight. Every word has direction. Every choice has purpose. He no longer lives at the mercy of other people's emotions. He commands his own field. He is sovereign, but not arrogant. Intense, yet serene. He is the man who inspires, sustains, and creates. And when a woman looks at him, she doesn't just see a man, she sees stability, presence, depth. She sees the reflection of what she's always sought but rarely found. A man who doesn't need her to exist, and precisely because of that, becomes impossible to forget. Love is not what holds you, it's what orbits around your fire. And when that fire is kept alive, everything around you shines. The woman feels it, the world notices it, and the man himself understands. Purpose was always the center. And when purpose is at the center, nothing, and not time, not absence, not rejection, can extinguish the light of a man who has become the sun.